She carved her initials into the banker's forehead while he begged. That was how the legend of Catherine "Cat" Malone truly began, though the stories about her had been circulating through the territories for months before that autumn day in 1876. The banker's name was Herbert Frost, and he made the mistake of telling Cat that women belonged in kitchens, not counting houses. Cat's response was to hold him down on his own desk while she used his letter opener to etch a perfect C and M into the soft flesh above his eyebrows. She took her time with it, making sure the letters were legible, making sure he would carry her mark for the rest of his life. Then she robbed his bank of $18,000 and rode out of Stillwater, Kansas, with her gang of 7 men trailing behind her like obedient hounds. Catherine Malone was 24 years old in 1876. Though she looked older, life had a way of aging women quickly on the frontier, and Cat's life had been harder than most. She stood 5 feet and 8 inches tall, which made her tower over most women and meet many men at eye level. Her hair was the color of dark copper, worn long when she wanted to pass for respectable and braided tight when she was working. Her eyes were green, the pale green of new leaves, and they had a way of looking through a person rather than at them. She had been born Catherine Margaret O'Brien in 1852, the daughter of Irish immigrants who had come to America chasing the promise of land and freedom. Her father, Patrick O'Brien, had been a good man but a terrible farmer. When the drought of 1863 killed what little crop they had managed, Patrick made a decision that would shape his daughter's future. He taught her to shoot, not the way most fathers taught daughters to handle a rifle for protection. Patrick O'Brien had been a marksman in the old country, and he recognized in his daughter the same steady hands and sharp eyes that had made him successful. He trained her the way he would have trained a son. By the time Cat was 12, she could shoot the head off a rattlesnake at 40 yards. By 14, she could draw and fire a pistol, faster than any man in the county. By 16, she was winning shooting competitions while dressed in her brother's clothes, splitting the prize money with her father and using it to keep the family fed. Then the war caught up with them. Patrick O'Brien was drafted into the Union Army in 1864 and killed at the Battle of Nashville 3 months later. Cat's mother, Margaret, died of pneumonia the following winter. At 17, Catherine O'Brien found herself alone with 2 younger brothers to feed and a homestead about to be foreclosed. She entered every shooting competition within 100 miles, wearing her father's clothes and calling herself Charles O'Brien. She won most of them, but it was not enough to save the farm. The bank took the homestead in the spring of 1870. Cat's brothers were sent to live with an aunt in St. Louis. Cat refused to go with them. She sold what little remained, bought a good horse and 2 excellent pistols, and rode west into the territories. For 2 years, she worked as a guard on freight wagons, still passing as a man. But the pay was poor and the work was brutal, and Cat began to realize that she was on the wrong side of the equation. The bandits who attacked the wagons made more in one night than she made in 6 months of honest work. So she switched sides. Her first robbery was in the spring of 1872, a freight wagon carrying mining payroll. She did it alone, took $600, and disappeared into the mountains. It was the easiest money she had ever made. But Cat knew that working alone had limits. She could not hit the bigger targets without help, and she knew that most men would not follow a woman into the kind of violence that serious robbery required. So she found men who had no choice but to follow her. Her first recruit was a half-Apache man named Tom Walker. Cat broke him out of a Santa Fe jail by walking in dressed as a lawyer's assistant, shooting the deputy in the leg, and handing Tom a gun. Her second recruit was a former Confederate soldier named Augustus Finch, so consumed by bitterness over the South's defeat that he would have burned the entire country down if given the chance. Then came the Pike brothers, Jacob and Nathaniel, both wanted for horse theft. They were young, stupid, and mean, but good with horses. Next was Esteban Ruiz, a Mexican vaquero cat saved from a lynch mob. Then Wallace Reed, a former Pinkerton detective dismissed for excessive brutality. Finally, Delilah Prewitt, a former madam who had killed 3 men and burned her brothel down rather than face arrest. Together they called themselves the Malone Gang, though newspapers often referred to them as the Devil's Daughter and her Desperadoes. Between 1873 and 1878, they committed over 40 robberies across 6 territories, taking an estimated $200,000. But it was not just the money that made Cat Malone legendary. It was the way she operated. Cat had rules, and she enforced them absolutely. No one in her gang drank before a job. No one fired a shot unless she gave the order. No one touched women or children during raids. Anyone who broke these rules answered to Cat personally. Jacob Pike learned this when he got drunk before a bank robbery and nearly got them all caught. Cat broke his trigger finger with the butt of her pistol and told him the next violation would cost him the whole hand. She planned every job with meticulous care, spending weeks studying targets, learning guard rotations, identifying escape routes. She never hit the same type of target twice in a row. She never operated in the same territory for more than 2 months. She had safe houses scattered across the West, places where the gang could disappear when the law got too close. And she had a gift for theater. She always wore the same outfit during jobs: black pants, black shirt, black hat, and a red scarf tied around her neck. She would introduce herself by name, making sure witnesses knew exactly who had robbed them. And she always left a calling card, a playing card with her initials written in her own blood, dropped on the counter before she walked out. The robbery that made her truly famous was the Stillwater Bank job in 1876, the one where she marked Herbert Frost. But it was the Kansas City train robbery in 1877 that cemented her place in outlaw history. The Union Pacific was running a special train carrying $500,000 in government bonds. The train had 20 armed guards, 2 Pinkerton agents, and a specially reinforced car for the bonds. Cat spent 2 months planning the robbery. On the night of April 15, 1877, the Malone gang blocked the tracks with a rock slide and ambushed the train. The battle lasted 40 minutes. 3 guards were killed. 5 more were wounded. Augustus Finch took a bullet through the shoulder, but when the smoke cleared, Cat walked onto that train like she owned it, shot the lock off the bond car, and personally loaded $200,000 worth of bonds into saddlebags. Before she left, she walked through the passenger cars and made every wealthy passenger donate their jewelry and cash. She collected another $15,000, and then, in a move that made her a folk hero to half the country, she walked through the second-class cars and gave every poor family $50 in cash, telling them it was a gift from someone who understood what it meant to be robbed by banks and railroads. The newspapers went wild. Eastern papers called her a terrorist and a demon. Western papers called her a Robin Hood in skirts. Wanted posters went up offering $10,000 for her capture, dead or alive. The Pinkertons assigned their best men to hunt her. The army sent cavalry patrols with orders to bring her in. Cat responded by robbing 2 more banks and a Wells Fargo office, leaving her bloody calling cards at each scene. But success breeds enemies, and Cat's enemies were multiplying. Other outlaw gangs were jealous of her territory. Lawmen were getting smarter about predicting her moves. And worst of all, someone within her own gang was talking. Wallace Reed, the former Pinkerton, had been playing both sides. He had been feeding information to his old colleagues, setting up an ambush that would take down the entire Malone gang. The ambush was set for October 3, 1878, at a safe house in New Mexico territory. The Pinkertons had 20 men positioned around the property, but Kat had always been one step ahead. She had suspected Wallace for weeks, had noticed small inconsistencies in his stories. The night before the planned ambush, she confronted him. Wallace confessed everything, thinking confession would earn him mercy. Instead, Kat shot him in both kneecaps and left him tied to a tree a mile from the safe house. When the Pinkertons found him the next morning, the Malone gang had vanished. But this time, Kat knew the walls were closing in. The betrayal had shaken her, made her realize that the gang's run was coming to an end. She called a meeting with her remaining members and made them an offer. She had hidden away nearly $60,000 over the years, money the gang did not know about. She would split it evenly among them if they agreed to disband, to scatter, to disappear, and never use the Malone name again. Everyone agreed, except Delilah. She and Kat had one last job planned, one final statement before they vanished. On November 12, 1878, two well-dressed women walked into the First National Bank of Denver. They waited patiently in line. When they reached the teller, they drew pistols and announced that the Malone gang was making a withdrawal. They took $12,000, shot a guard who tried to be a hero, and walked out into a waiting carriage. It was the last confirmed Malone gang robbery. After that, Catherine Malone simply vanished. There were sightings for years in San Francisco, in Mexico City, in New Orleans. Every female outlaw arrested in the West was investigated to see if she might be the legendary Kat Malone. But none of them ever were. The truth, as far as historians have been able to piece together, is that Kat used her hidden money to buy a small ranch in Montana under a false name. She married a widower with 3 children, a man who never knew about her past, and lived quietly until her death in 1923 at the age of 71. She was buried under her married name in a small cemetery overlooking the Yellowstone River. Her obituary made no mention of the Malone gang, of the banks and trains she had robbed, of the legend she had built. It described her as a devoted wife, a loving stepmother, and an excellent shot who had won the county marksmanship competition 6 years running. But in the small towns and mining camps scattered across the West, old-timers still tell stories about Kat Malone and her Desperadoes, about the woman who could outshoot, outthink, and outlast any man who challenged her, about the outlaw who carved her initials into a banker's forehead and made him live with the reminder of his disrespect, about the gang that was never caught, never broken, that disbanded on their own terms and vanished into legend. And sometimes in museums and private collections, a blood-stained playing card will surface, usually a Queen of Hearts with the letters CM written in faded brown ink. Collectors pay thousands for them, these calling cards from a woman who refused to be what the world expected, who took what she wanted and dared anyone to stop her. Herbert Frost lived until 1901, and for 25 years he carried Catherine Malone's initials on his forehead. He told everyone who asked that they were scars from a childhood accident. But late at night, in saloons when he had drunk too much, he would tell the real story. He would describe the cold precision of her hands, the absolute fearlessness in her eyes, the way she smiled while she carved her name into his flesh. He always ended the story the same way, with a mixture of terror and admiration in his voice. She told me I would carry her forever. She told me that every time I looked in a mirror, I would remember that Catherine Malone was real and that she had marked me as hers. And then she kissed the top of my head and walked out with my bank's money like it had belonged to her all along.